Hi, and welcome to Beyond Sunday. I'm Brandon Walters, Reverend James King, back again.
Here we are.
Back again. Good to talk to you again. I always love these.
Yeah, another conversation.
So today I want to talk about something that's kind of been on my mind a little bit lately, and I know I've had some early perceptions of my own that are kind of changing and learning about more, but it's tithing.
Tithing, okay.
And tithing, for me, well, first of all, I want to talk about your perspective on tithing.
Mm-hmm. Well, tithing is something that is connected to the idea of giving, okay? We live on a circular planet. We live in a spiral universe that is circular. And so everything that we experience is involved with circulation. And so each one of us as spiritual beings, we are here to circulate who we are, what we have, what we do, our gifts, our talents. We're to put them out there. And as we put them out there, then the universe recognizes that giving. And so in the scriptures it says, give and it shall be given to you, pressed down, shaken together, heaped up, and running over. Okay? So it's a beautiful, beautiful law.
That just feels good.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Yeah. And so what happens in life is that we're taught by the ego to pull everything within, to not, to hold back, to not be yourself, to not give, to not contribute. And so we get stuck. And you do know the secret, right?
The secret?
Yeah. Do you know who you are? You do know that you are divine, right?
Yes. No, I know that. I'm learning that. That's a hard thing.
I know.
I can know it, but to really know it.
Yes, right. And that's what we're here to learn, is we're here to learn to be co-creators together with the divine. And we are divine. It's like if somebody is the child of a famous person like Bill Gates, they are a Gates, right? They are a Gates. And so they have access to everything that their father has access to, right? Mm-hmm. And it's the same with all of us. We are children of God. We have the same access to the divine power. We have access to everything, And so that's what we're here to discover and to learn about, is how to access and how to work with it and how to create with those energies. And one of the ways we do that is to learn how to give what and who we are.
So let me tell you where I've kind of come from on the tithing thing. My whole life I've kind of felt like tithing seemed like this church scam. I mean, really, it felt like it was this, let's guilt them into giving 10% of their money so we can have plenty, so the church can have plenty. And then I was at a seminar recently, a couple years ago, and Mark Victor Hansen spoke.
Oh, yes.
And he had just written a tiny little book about tithing. It was a tiny little thing, and I didn't get it, but it started to get me thinking about it. He had spoken a little bit about the spiritual practice and the principles behind it. Right. I started getting very interested. And then in a class now that talks about tithing in a much deeper level, and it's very different than what I thought. And it's a much more spiritual practice.
Right.
And it's not about money at all.
Yeah.
But it's a hard thing to, one of the things that I recently learned is not giving up 10, it's getting to keep 90.
Very good, yeah.
And the 10 goes to seed, which I think is it goes to seed more.
Right,
more.
Right, exactly.
So, talk about that a little bit, because that's been really good for me.
Yeah. Well, the Hebrews, the Jews, they have practiced the law of tithing, for thousands of years. It's a very ancient principle. And in fact, the Jews believed that if you didn't tithe, you were under a curse. Okay? And so, but when you tithe, it says that you open the windows of heaven and you are poured out a blessing that you will not have room enough to contain. That's what it says, literally, in Malachi chapter 3.
That feels pretty good, too.
That feels real good, yeah. And so the idea is we get stuck in the ego, we get stuck, and then we need to open up the channel. And the way that we do that is by taking that 10% and giving it to our spiritual source. And what we're telling the universe is our priority is our spirituality, say. And the universe says, this one is focused on spiritual energy, you know. And so as we focus on that, then more of that comes through, and we're fed more, we learn more, we grow more. And so it just opens the windows, you know, it opens the doors because of our ego-trained way of thinking. Does that make sense?
It does, but a question comes to me, so why does our ego do that? I mean, why is it that we feel like we need to hoard? And I guess it's the whole lack mentality. Yeah. And that's another part of this, is that you kind of show God that you've got plenty, I guess.
Right.
Is that the kind of the thought behind it?
Absolutely, absolutely. Because the vibration of wealth and prosperity attracts more wealth and prosperity. Okay? It's like if you want love, then you have to give love. If you want to be at peace, then you have to make peace your focus, and you have to give project a peaceful attitude. Right? Mm-hmm. So if you want more income, then you've got to give more. Okay? If you want money or cash or whatever it is, you've got to give more of that in order to receive more. Does that make sense?
It does. It makes perfect sense. It's just, it also has to do with how you give it, though. And what spirit you give
absolutely.
it, because that's,
absolutely.
You know, giving it just to get, or I don't know, and that's a tough little transition. Like, I got to give it because that means I'm going to get more, rather than I give it because it's going to my spiritual source, I guess.
Right.
So talk about, tell me a little bit about how to get in that spirit of giving.
Okay. Well, in the scriptures, it talks about.
I sound like Santa Claus, the spirit of giving. The spirit of tithing.
There you go. Yeah. But in the scriptures, it talks about, there's one that says, God loves a cheerful giver. The universe loves a cheerful giver, okay? Because a complaining giver, see, what are we doing? We're pronouncing bad, a curse on our good, see? And so the idea. And there's one version that says God loves a hilarious giver. And I love that. So the key is when you come.
What does that mean? Because that sounds even better to me.
Yeah, because you give from, you know the law so well, you know that it works so well that you just hilariously give because you know it's just going to come pouring back to you and through you. Does that make sense?
That is great. Talk about a good feeling piece of scripture right there. Okay.
Yeah, and so, that's what giving is really about, because if you give, you will receive. That's the law, It's the law of karma, it's the law of giving, and you give, you receive. Because once you give, you open your hands, It's like somebody says, well, I want to quit this bad habit that I have, And they say, God, take this away from me. Well, that's not going to work. You have to open your hands. And that's the way it is with money and with giving and with tithing. And giving to your spiritual source, well, that's just the icing on the cake, because what you're doing is you're refocusing your life and realigning your life with the divine power. Because you're saying, my first priority is divinity, is God. And so I want to give to that because that is what I want to receive. So whatever you give out is what you will get back. It's the law. But a lot of people use it for guilt purposes and manipulation. And, we want to stay out of that, And in fact, in Unity, we don't do that. We don't guilt people into giving. We recommend, we suggest, we advise, but when it comes down to it, it's all up to the individual to decide what is important to you. But when the light comes on and you discover that when you give that 10%, man, wow, the 90% is bigger, and grows and expands.
And the 10% is bigger.
Exactly, yeah.
Well, but it's not just about money either. It's,
right.
Because I know there's people out there who give a ton of their time and talent,
right,
but not necessarily their income.
Yeah.
And so I mean, there's a balance to it, but
that's the key.
it's time and talent too.
Yeah,
is my point.
Right, absolutely, yeah. Because as you give your time towards something that you enjoy, that you love, then you will get more of that, and you will find more things to love, more things to enjoy, more things that you like doing. When you give your talents, then your talents will increase. It's like if I give myself to play the piano for 2 hours every day, I don't do that. But just say I did. Because I'm not a piano player, I'm a guitar player. Yeah. But if I did that, if I give myself to that, then I'm going to reap a harvest. I'm going to reap a reward for it. It's going to pay off for me. And I'm going to develop into something that really is something that's enjoyable.
Well, let me ask. I know I've had the question before, and I imagine some other folks might have the same question. What if you're just giving to a charity that you believe in, rather than your church or something like that?
Right.
What's the difference there?
There's nothing wrong with giving to a charity. I believe in giving to a charity, but if you're giving to help people with food, then there will be more food. Okay? Mm-hmm. But in the Bible, it says, and all the ancient scriptures tell us, that we need to give toward our spirituality first, if that's what we really want. And then as we learn compassion, as we learn service, as we learn the universal law of flow, then we can give more and help the charities. But there's nothing wrong with giving to charities, but if that's your only focus, you'll never be able to feed everybody. Right. You know what I mean? But if we can get everybody more focused on the spiritual, then they will develop into a more compassionate, giving person, and then ultimately we could feed everybody. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. It does. It's a great answer because it's a bigger answer. It's a much bigger answer.
Right.
And I know that the quote I've heard before, you can't be poor enough to help a poor person. You can't be sick enough to help a sick person. Right. And it sort of fits in there.
Right. Because you have to be whole. Or if you're just giving to the material world, if you're not really whole and balanced, then you will lose energy after a while. So you got to come from the spiritual place in order for any of that to work out and to make sense.
Well, let me ask you this: the church, basically, you give 10% to your church. Does the church give 10%?
Yeah, but see, the church is the people.
Yeah.
Okay, and so the people are giving their 10%, and so it works.
Where does the church 10% go?
Well, the church supports the headquarters. Unity, mm-hmm. and we support
which is your spiritual
right.
source. Yeah.
We see our first priority is to support the spiritual. And then we do what we call benevolence giving to help others too. But our first priority is to give spiritually, And once you get that right, then you give spiritually, and then you can also keep 10% and put in the bank, so that you have a cushion. So because the way it works, and maybe I'm not totally answering your question.
No, that was it, because I was wondering where the church gives.
Absolutely. We give back to the ones that feed us.
Yeah.
And we give to the people who feed us, the people that come in and teach us and that share with us. So we give to that. And so it probably adds up more than 10%,
What's the 10% number? Where does that come from?
Well, I think basically it came from the Jews. The first fruits, the tithe, and it has to do with, in those days, there was no government, there was none of that kind of stuff, and so they would give.
Because they get 50.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but yeah, and so the 10%, it kind of comes from the Jews, but it's the idea of the first fruits of your garden, If you give it back to God from which it came, you are recognizing your source. See, you're recognizing where it comes from. So by giving it back to God, you know, and joyfully, you know, with the right spirit, then more will come, and your garden will grow and blossom and produce.
It seems like that number is sort of right on the edge of comfort, you know?
Yeah,
It
yeah.
just feel like this right
Yeah.
there is like just enough to kind of make you go, "Ugh," but then, you know, but not enough
Yeah.
to take.
Well, the
you know,
interesting thing of it is in the biblical numerology, the number 10 is the number of responsibility.
Oh,
Okay?
well,
There are
makes sense.
10 commandments. Okay? You notice when you get a bill, they usually give you a 10-day grace period. Okay? And so the number 10 has to do with responsibility. And so as you mature and as you grow, you become more responsible for everything because, like I said earlier, you know who you are, right? You're a God in embryo, you know? And so you're learning to be a creator, you know? You're learning how this all works and what the principles are and how to work them and how to use them.
All right, what would your advice be for how to handle our money?
Yeah, well,
Because
As I-
if it's energy and it's, you know, you want to respect it
Right.
and things like that, but you also wanted to
oh,
bring
absolutely.
it in. So what are some thoughts we could do?
Absolutely. I think that you look at it as seed, you know, your 10% as seed. You plant it in fertile soil, let it grow, and then you take another 10% and you put it in the bank and you don't think about it. Because here's the thing about, it's like, if you ever noticed that you have a car payment and you're paying on that and finally you pay it off. But if you don't mark that money for something else, what happens?
It'll be gone.
It disappears. And all of a sudden, you wonder where it went. And so the key is to mark your money and say, okay, this is for this over here, this is for this over here. And as you label it and as you do that, then you create a shape or a form, you know, as we talked about the other day in class, you create a form for it to come through, you know.
Okay.
So does that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense. But I'm thinking more
Okay.
of like every day because you don't want to hoard either. You want to circulate.
Right.
So you know, and the way you spend your money, the way
Yeah.
you write your checks, the way
Right.
you know, the way you
Oh, yeah.
put that out there with
Yeah.
with joy and
Yeah, I think every time you sit down to write a bill, you want to just give thanks. You know, be in the magnanimous sense and feel of gratitude. You know, I'm just happy to do this, and you write the check and you send the money and you bless it. You know, when you go through the store and you slide your card or you write whatever it is, you just bless it. You know, so I'm so glad that I was able to do that today. You know, I'm so thankful for that.
Yeah, because it's going on to do some other things.
Absolutely.
Employ people and things like that.
Absolutely. And the more we put out there and circulate, you know, I mean, that's, you know, there's some things going on in our world today that need to kind of come into balance, you know, because you can be wealthy and not be rich.
Right.
You can have all the money in the world and still be fearful and still live in a poverty consciousness, you know, a consciousness of limitation and having to hoard. And, you know, the Bible talks about building bigger barns and storing all your stuff, but you lose your soul in the process, you know. And that's kind of what a lot of people have done today. And so you know, it's like Earl Nightingale, if you know, he is kind of the father of motivation. He said one time, he said, if you go to a fireplace and you say, give me heat, and I'll give you some wood.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Eat
work.
first.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, you got to put the wood in there. So you get the wood and you put it in there, and that's how you begin to ignite your soul, your spiritual life. You know, you put the wood in there, you put it out there. You know, the energy, and that's all money is really. It's just a symbol. It's very arbitrary in our society. Back thousands of years ago, they would give camels and chickens and eggs, and that's the way they did it. But today, we've decided, well, $1 represents $1. You know, the paper has no value other than what we give it. We just believe in it, you know.
Unless you're in Canada.
Unless you're in Canada. And then you have a Canadian dollar, you know.
Well, so here's a question that
Okay.
just pops up in my head is the people who, not necessarily tithing, but are vastly wealthy and just attract money like just Midas touch kind of
Right.
stuff. Well, how does that work? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, I always want to
Yeah.
my brain always goes to that devil's advocate in a way to go, I want to understand.
Yeah.
How are they attracting it without doing the spiritual principles that really open the door and make room for it?
Well, they are doing a spiritual principle, because it's like if you look at Jobs and Gates, Oprah Winfrey, all these people who are very wealthy billionaires.
Well, they give. Those folks.
Yeah. What do they give, though? They gave their talents. They gave themselves to life. I mean, they fully embraced and lived their life and were inventive and were in touch with that creativity, which is the divine spark, you know? And so they put it out there, and out of that, you know, they realized the value of giving, of the circulation. You know, I mean,
just came in a different form.
It just came in a different form, different shape.
So, I mean, sounds like it boils down to this. You tithe to make room.
Very good.
Make some room for,
a good way to
for
say
it to
it.
come in.
Yeah.
But now, let's talk about, would that carry over to a closet?
Mm-hmm.
You know, clean out that.
Yeah.
You know, get rid of some stuff you're not, you know, that.
That's right.
Stuff like that, or whatever. It makes room for more.
Yeah.
Is that
Absolutely.
pretty much everything?
Everything. I mean, you know, if your house is...
I got to get rid of my car.
Yeah, if you want a new car, get rid of your old one, you know? And sometimes, you know, I've seen it work. You know, there was a time...
Yeah, give me a story, yeah.
When I was in school, and it was a religious school, and I had been given a certain amount of money from my parents, and I'd never been away from home much, okay? And so I was a freshman in college, and, you know, just didn't know, I never had a checkbook, you know, didn't know anything about money, okay? And so I spent all the money I had in a couple of weeks, and it was supposed to get me through like a month or 6 weeks. And so I was kind of embarrassed to call my parents, you know? And so one day I was sitting in chapel, and they were passing an offering, and I had $2 in my pocket. Okay, $2. And I was thinking, man, I could buy some peanut butter and some bread. I could get through another week or so with that. And so something...
Must have been a while back.
Yeah, this was back in the 70s, yeah.
I was going to say.
I'm a child of the 70s. But anyway, so I was sitting there, and the offering plate was getting closer, and it just felt like that money was just jumping out of my pocket. It needed to go into that plate. And I didn't totally understand it, you know. And so I thought, well, what am I going to do, you know? And I said, well, okay, God, I'm just going to do it. And so I put the money in the plate. And after I did, I felt so good. I really felt good. And I went back to my room, and I thought, oh, I need to check my mail. Okay. And so I went to the mailbox, and I have an uncle who's now deceased. But the way that his wife described it in the letter, she said, your uncle... Wayne jumped off the couch and said, and he called me Jimmy, send Jimmy X amount of dollars, okay? And he had never done that before that and had not done it since, okay? And so I opened it up, and there was a money order for exactly what I needed to get through the next 4 weeks. And it was amazing, you know? So I always think about that, and I've seen over the years that sometimes when the flow stops, it's because I've gotten into fear and I've gotten stuck and I quit giving. Mm-hmm. And once I started giving again, then the flow started coming. And sometimes it'll come like a gush, you know, because that's all we need to do is just open it up. Just open up the flow.
Like uncrimp the hose, huh?
Exactly, yeah, very good.
Well, this has been great. I've learned a lot, and the more I learn about tithing, the more I get into it. It's really, it feels good.
Yeah.
It's a good practice. It feels good.
Right.
And I'm looking forward to learning more. But I appreciate your time and spend some time with us and
My
telling
pleasure.
us your
My
stories
pleasure.
and
Yeah.
experiences and learning us on this a little bit because we like it. I mean, I like it.
Yeah.
So hopefully
Right.
the folks out there get
Yeah, I
something out
hope
of it
that
as
people
well.
have heard something
And,
that they...
Thanks for watching. We will see you again soon.
Okay.
We'll talk about something new and different.
All right.
All right.
Thank you, Brandon.
Get your subjects ready because we're
Yes,
going to come
sir.
back. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.